Welcome back, everyone. Today we're gonna be making a dog bat wing costume. The pattern is free, it comes in multiple different sizes, and it's super easy to make. So if you're looking for a last minute Halloween costume for your dog, this is the one. With all that being said, grab the free printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you need a half to 1 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a very lightweight vinyl or full leather material. And you really want this to be on the lighter weight side because once you stack all these layers together, it can get pretty bulky and tricky to sew. I'm gonna be using a lightweight faux leather. I'll link it down below. It worked out very nice and it was easy to sew. But like always, get creative, test different fabrics, and find something that's gonna work for you. You'll need a half to 1 yard for your secondary fabric. This is gonna be the fabric on the underside of the wing. I ended up going with the twill. It worked really nice, and once all these layers got stacked together, it wasn't too bulky. You'll need 1 yard of foam or interfacing. This is gonna go on the top side of the wing, so when we make the wing stitches, it's gonna create indentions and make the wing look more realistic. This is optional. If you don't wanna add this feature, you can skip this supply. You'll need a half to 1 yard of chipboard or cardboard. This will be used as a stabilizer inside the wing. It's also gonna get the wings to pop out. I'm using a 55-point chipboard, and it also comes in a huge piece, so you'll have plenty for the project. You'll need a 1/4 yard of 1/2 inch elastic. We'll be placing this in the center to get the wings to stand up. It's a really cool feature to add because once they run, it's gonna bounce up that center and make it look like the wings are flapping. And again, it is optional. If you don't want to add this feature, you can skip this supply. You'll need 4 band wrap elastic with Velcro. This is gonna be used to wrap around your dog's chest area for a secure fit. I found that these work really good. I linked them down in the description below. They come in all different widths, so whatever size you're using, you'll be able to find one for that size. They wrap around snugly, grip tight, and overall make it so the wings don't budge. But we'll get more into this once we start constructing the harness. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This is a free pattern. It's available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is download it, print it off, tape it together, and you're ready to go. And before you tape your pattern together, the best thing to do is cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is gonna allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. And once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. And after taping the pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. If you're only trying to print one size, take a look at the second page on the pattern. It will give you the size chart and the print size guide. The size chart will show the measurement of the wings, and then from there you can take it over to the print size guide, giving you the exact pages to print for that size. It's a great way to go if you want to save a little bit of ink and paper. When it comes to picking the size, there's actually not a perfect size for any sized animal. It really just depends on how big you want the wings to be. For example, my dog is a medium-sized dog, and I went with the larger size. And this is just because I wanted the wings to be a little bit bigger. But you can go the exact opposite and make smaller wings on a bigger dog. It really comes down to whatever is going to work best on your dog. And after picking out a size, you can easily make adjustments to better fit your dog. The first adjustment you can make is going to be at the center of the pattern. This is where the pattern sits on your dog's back, so changing the height can really make a big difference. If you have a smaller dog and you're using a bigger wing, you're going to want to shrink that center down. The second adjustment is going to be the actual length of the wing. You can make it longer by retracing the pattern on a sheet of paper and extending it out further. You can also do the same thing with the wing height. And not all wing sizes are going to work with every dog, so it's best to make these adjustments if you think it's necessary. But anyways, moving on to cutting out the fabric. The first cuts we're going to make are going to be for the full size of the wing, and this will be the solid line. You'll need 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and also 1 cut out of your main fabric. And both of these panels will be cut on the fold of the fabric. The end result should be a mirrored image on both sides of the center. And if you don't have a fold on the fabric, all you have to do is trace one side, reflect it over the center, and trace the opposite side. For the second cut, we want to first cut the pattern on the dashed line. This is our 1/2 inch fold allowance, and we're not going to need it for the next 2 panels. Which brings us into our last 2 panels to cut for this pattern. You'll need 1 cut out of your cardboard or chipboard. This will be used for the stabilizer, and I'm using a 55-point chipboard. And lastly, you'll need 1 cut out of your interfacing or foam. And for this one, I'm actually using a quilting style fabric. The end result turned out really nice, but again, this is a feature we're adding. If you don't want to add it, you don't need to get this supply. Now that we have all the panels cut, we're going to move on to assembly. The first thing we're going to do is grab the secondary fabric panel, along with the chipboard or cardboard panel. And what we're going to be doing is preparing the secondary fabric for later steps. The first thing you want to do is center the chipboard in the middle of the secondary fabric layer. Then we're going to roll the secondary fabric layer over the chipboard and press it down. But since there's a lot of angles and curves, we want to make notches around the outside edge so it doesn't bunch up. And you're going to want to cut as close to the cardboard as you can. This will allow the fabric to work a little bit more freely around those curved edges. After making the notches, grab your press and start rolling that fabric over the edge and pressing it down. There will be extra fabric at the wing points, but we're going to roll that inwards and glue it down. If you're still having a hard time trying to wrap that fabric around the edge, you can make more notches. Next, we're going to remove the chipboard, place it off to the side, and grab super glue. Now you can use fabric glue, but I think super glue sets way quicker and it makes this step a lot easier. And all we're going to do is take a small amount of glue, place it inside the fold, and glue that fold down. This is why I like using super glue, because it sets very quick and you don't have to sit there and hold it for a long time. Now that we have the fold glued down, we're going to go back to the corners and trim any of the bulk. And for the wing points, glue them down, fold them inward, and glue them down one more time. This will complete the secondary fabric layer, so we can place it off to the side and grab the chipboard layer along with the interfacing or foam layer. As you can see, these two layers slide around fairly easy, and we don't want that. We want these layers to be locked together. So we're going to be gluing them, but not with the super glue. We're going to be using a temporary adhesive. This will bond the two layers, making it easier to line everything up in later steps. If you're using a similar adhesive, you don't need a lot, just spray it onto the chipboard and press down the interfacing layer. If you do use too much, it may soak through the interfacing, so you want to try to avoid that. Also, this is a sewable adhesive, and I do recommend looking for something like this because it makes it a lot easier to sew. After adhering the two layers, you may notice that your interfacing layer is a little bit bigger than your chipboard layer. This is because that interfacing stretched a little bit. It's totally fine. We'll fix it in future steps. Now we can grab the main fabric layer and place the wrong side to the right side of the interfacing. Flip the assembly around to the wrong side so the chipboard is facing upward. And like I just said, the interfacing is sticking past the chipboard just a little bit. This is totally fine. All you have to do is take a pair of scissors and trim it flush to the chipboard. It's very common for interfacing to stretch. It's not going to mess up anything in future steps. Using the same adhesive, we're going to apply it to the wrong side of the main fabric and press the interfacing side down so it's in place. Remember to keep it centered in that main fabric layer. Just like with the secondary fabric layer, we're going to add notches all the way around the outside edge. Once you completed all the notches, we're going to grab the super glue and do the same thing just like we did with the secondary fabric layer. Apply the super glue along the edge and roll the main fabric layer over the chipboard. And for the best results, you really want to pull that main fabric tight over the edge, because the goal is to get that edge as smooth as possible to resemble the chipboard. When it comes to the wingtips, you will need to cut a little bit of that fabric to reduce the bulk and then fold it inward and glue it down. The corners do take a little bit of time because you don't want them bulky or else it's going to be hard to sew through. Just like with the secondary layer, if you see a ripple or something bulking up, you can always add another notch and apply more glue. But after making all the final touches, we're going to grab the secondary fabric layer and place the wrong sides together, lining up the outside edges. To make it easier to sew, we're going to apply the temporary adhesive. This will prevent the layers from shifting around and ultimately keep them lined up around the outside edge. Normally, I would just pin the layers together, but this chipboard is a little bit thick and it's hard to get a pin through the chipboard. So using the adhesive is the next best thing. If done correctly, both of these layers should line up perfectly. And once the glue dries, we're going to sew all the way around the outside edge about 1/4 inch away from the edge. This stitch can be pretty tricky if you're using a heavier weight fabric, so I recommend using a heavyweight needle. And also take your time going around the curves. If you try to go too fast, it might throw off the stitch and make the end product look not too great. Also, for a different look, you can switch it up from a straight stitch to a zigzag stitch. Once you finished up stitching, double check both sides, make sure all the layers got stitched together. Sometimes when you're working with stickier vinyls, you may get puckering along the edge. That happened to me just a little bit, but I'm just going to keep on going. The best way to fix this is to use a walking foot sewing machine. Or if you don't have access to a walking foot sewing machine, you can switch the presser foot to a rolling presser foot. But anyways, moving on, we're going to grab the pattern and locate the wing stitch guide. And what we're going to be doing is adding a stitch directly on top of the guide for both sides of the wing. The easiest way to do it is to mark each guide with chalk or a pencil. You want to use something that you can wipe away. And these markings don't have to be perfect, you just want to get them as close as possible. The biggest thing we're trying to do is to get them the same on both sides. Overall, this will make the wings look more symmetrical in the end. You can also add more than just the 2 on each side, but if you do add more, you're going to want to mirror that on the opposite side. Once you're ready, we're going to add a stitch to each one of those stitch guides. Again, I recommend using a heavier weight needle and taking your time with each stitch. You also want to try to do these in one go because if you start and stop, it might add a little bit of a ripple in the stitch. Now, I didn't add any in the center because that's where we're going to be attaching the harness in future steps, so we want to keep that area clear. Also, as you can see, by adding that interfacing, it pushes up that layer, giving it a more three-dimensional look. And the more interfacing you add, the more defined it will be. Now this next step is optional. We're going to be adding elastic elastic to the center to hike up the wings so they don't just flop down. To do this, I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch band elastic. The elastic I'm using is on the tighter side, meaning it's not going to stretch as much, and it's also going to last longer over time. The first thing you want to do is figure out the measurements for your elastic, and to do this, you want to see where it's going to bend at the center, and it's going to be on each side of the center point. So right where the center curve dips at the top, that's where I'm going to be sewing the elastic. This may be different with different sizes and what style stabilizer you're using. Then I'm going to stretch the elastic to the max to reach those 2 points. Ultimately, once this is sewn on, it will pull those 2 sides together and bring the wings up. Remember to cut a little extra on the elastic for seam allowance, because we're going to be rolling the outside edges under so it's a nice clean edge. And you may want to play around with the length of the elastic. Not all elastic has the same stretch, and the weight of the stabilizer does play a big role. Mine is on the heavier side, so I need the elastic to stretch a lot to pull up the sides. And once you found the perfect amount of stretch, the best way to sew it is to start on one side, sew it down, and then stretch it to the opposite side and sew that side down second. It's best to start with a small tack stitch, so that way when you finish up and it's not right, you can de-thread it and reposition. And as you can see, it pulls the outside wings upward and gives it more of a bounce in the center. This also adds a little bit of movement in the wings. When your dog is running, it's going to bounce that center and make it look more like it's flapping. And there is no right way to do this step, because you can move the elastic even further out and make the wings go higher up. So it really comes down to playing around with the elastic you're using to find that sweet spot. But anyways, that's going to complete the wing portion of this project, so we can place them off to the side and cut 2 rectangles out of your secondary fabric. And the height of this panel will be based on the height of the wings you're making. We'll be going strictly off the center height because we want it to be about the same size as that center. So if you did end up changing that height, just make sure you match these panels to the same measurement. The width of this panel is going to be based on the circumference of your dog's chest. You want it to be long enough to rest on their back. I'm also going to be using the same interfacing to create the harness. Essentially, this will add a padded layer, making it more comfortable for the dog. Place the interfacing layer on the wrong side of one of your panels. And to really make this harness work good, we're going to be using elastic bands with Velcro on the end. And I did buy these pre-made. They work very great. They're typically used for arms or legs. And these are going to complete the second half of the harness to wrap around the chest and neck area. You will need 4, 2 for each size, and you can get these at any width to match your size pattern. So going off your dog's chest measurements, we're going to adjust the elastic on the panel. These bands are fairly long, and they're going to be too long for my dog, so I'm going to pull it more towards the outside edge. So when it wraps around, it's going to be a tighter fit. If they are too small for your dog, you can extend the width of the panel. For the first 2 bands, we're going to have the Velcro placed upward and on the inside of the seam allowance. And I will add a link in the description for these bands if you're looking for the same ones. For the second set, we're going to place it on the opposite side with the Velcro pointed down. This will allow the Velcro bands to attach to each other without anything flapping around. I do recommend placing a few pins on the band so that way they're not shifting around and they don't go in the seam allowance. Now we can place the second panel directly on top with right sides together, lining up the outside edges. Then we're going to stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the outside edge, leaving a 4-inch gap so we can pull the right sides out after stitching. And the biggest thing to watch out for is when you're sewing those top and bottom edges, you want to watch out for the band so you don't accidentally stitch through it. This is why it's best to place a few pins to keep them out of the way as you're stitching. Now if you made yours of the actual measurements, you can trim the sides and pull the right sides out. But before we're going to do that, I'm actually going to pull the right sides out and try it on my dog, because I can always de-thread, add a little bit more or less elastic. Once you made the adjustments, we're going to pull the wrong sides out and trim the elastic flush with the seam allowance. Then flip the right sides back out, locate the opening along the side. To seal it off, we're going to push the layers inward so the right sides are together and place a few pins. You also want to make sure the corners are nice and poked out, and to do this you can use a pair of scissors, but from here we're going to add a top stitch all the way around the outside edge. After finishing up the stitch, you can try it on your dog one more time just to see how it fits. I also do highly recommend adding the interfacing on the inside. It adds a little layer of padding, and in the long run that's going to be a lot more comfortable for your dog. Next, we can grab the wing assembly and place it directly in the center of the harness. And it's very important you get this directly in the center of the harness, or else when you put it on, it might not sit perfect. To secure it down, we're going to add 2 stitches, one on each side of the center. They'll be about 2 inches apart from one another, so you may want to mark them out with chalk before you start stitching. We're also going under the elastic, so you're going to need to start and stop the stitch after each elastic strip. And after finishing up the strip, the costume is complete. The last thing I want to go over is how to use the harness. The front 2 elastic bands are going to wrap around the neck, and then the back 2 are going to wrap around the front of the chest. This will give you a nice secure fit and prevent the wings from sliding back and forth. And I did use wider bands. This does make a difference when securing it down. If you do have a smaller dog, you can get smaller bands and they work just as good. These bands are a huge part of making this costume work, so I highly recommend looking into them. The second adjustment you can make is to the actual harness panels. Does make a lot of difference. You don't want it too wide or too short. I found that having it cover the back to the sides is about the perfect size. This gives you enough room for the elastic to wrap around and secure down tight. But other than that, I hope you had some fun with this project, and like always, get creative with it and make something that's really unique to your dog. And there you have it, your Batwing costume is complete. Hopefully yours turned out as good as mine. It really does make a big difference using different styles of fabric. The faux leather I used really brought out a unique quality, and it ended up looking really nice. Also, messing around with the elastic in the middle can really make the wings flap. It's gonna cause that center to bounce up and down when they're running. You're not gonna see it so much when they're walking, but when they start running, it's gonna bounce up and down in the center and make it look like the wings are flapping. But like always, I'd love to see what you come up with, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing, and until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.